How far does your loyalty go? How far would he go for his homeland, for your flag? What if the price for that loyalty was higher than any human being should pay? Betrayal hurts, but the betrayal of someone you love, that destroys the soul. This man you see on the screen, this soldier, he wasn't just any fighter. Jack Dawson faced hell in the trenches of Europe. He felt the taste of death in his mouth. He saw friends being torn to pieces in front of him. And all why? For a simple and pure reason: to return home, for your family. But war has a cruel way of destroying everything we love, even when we think we are too far from it. Just imagine, you spend 3 years killing to survive, sleeping in muddy holes, eating rotten food, listening to the screams of the wounded who cannot be saved, and what keeps you alive is that crumpled photo in your pocket, the photo of your mother, your father, and your little brother. This is Jack, and the only thing he wanted was to return to the arms of his family. Hug your brother William. Little did he know that that hug would never be the same. When Jack's boots finally set foot on the soil of his hometown, something was wrong. You feel when people avoid your gaze, when conversations die down, when you enter the room, when your own mother can't look you in the eye without crying. Where's William? This simple question made the air in the room freeze. The silence said it all. But it wasn't even half the truth. We say war separates families, but we rarely talk about how it can destroy bonds we thought were indestructible, how it can transform what we love into something unrecognizable. Jack started to notice strange things: hidden documents, conversations interrupted, inexplicable tears. And then, that night while everyone was sleeping, he opened a locked drawer. What he found there would change everything he believed about loyalty, about family, and about the very war he fought. The truth was far more painful than any battle wound, much more devastating than any bomb, because when you discover secrets about the one you love most, it breaks something inside you that can never be fixed. What Jack discovered that night forever changed his view of war, about his own brother. Above all, stay until the end to discover the truth that shook this family to its foundations, a revelation so devastating that it made this veteran soldier, who faced the horrors of war without shedding a tear, fall to his knees and cry like a child. What could be so terrible that it would break a man who had already seen hell on earth? You are faced with a revelation that few will have the privilege of knowing, a truth held for decades that challenges everything we thought we knew about loyalty and family. Be part of the select group that preserves these forbidden stories. Leave your like now and sign up to have access to the revelations that history books don't tell you about. War turns men into monsters. But what does it do with those we love, with those we swore to protect? Imagine a world where your certainties collapse like sandcastles, a world where the only truth you know is pain. This is the reality of a soldier returning home. This is Jack Dawson's reality. How many times in your life have you been forced to choose between what is right and what is necessary, between loyalty to your nation and loyalty to your blood? Jack made that choice, and the price he paid was unimaginable. History tells us about heroes, about medals, about victories. But who tells the story of those who return home and discover that the real battlefield was not in the trenches, but within the walls of their own family? The Second World War claimed 75 million lives. It left scars on entire nations. But the deepest scars are the ones no one sees, the ones that bleed inside, silently, for decades, the ones that Jack carries to this day. What would you do if you came back from war and discovered that the person you love most in the world carries a secret so devastating that it could destroy everything you believe in? A secret that turns your hero into a villain in the eyes of everyone around him. Today you will learn Jack's story, a man who swore to die for freedom, for democracy, for America. But what happens when that same America turns his brother into something he can't recognize? It's not a pleasant story. It's not a story with a happy ending. It's a story about how war doesn't end when the guns fall silent. She continues. In the minds, in hearts, in broken families. If you think you know the horror of war, think again. The real horror is not in the bombs or the bullets. It's in the silence that follows. In the blank stares of those who survived only to discover that perhaps it would have been better not to survive. This story will shake your certainties about loyalty and family. What would you do if you discovered a devastating secret about someone you love? Leave it in the comments. The world on fire, freedom hanging by a thread, Jack Dawson was just 22 years old when he left everything behind, a boy from Minnesota with a bright future ahead of him, captain of the baseball team, Marie Sullivan's fiancé, the eldest son of Irish immigrants who came to America in search of a dream. Jack was an American through and through, raised with values of honor, hard work, and above all, loyalty. The Dawson family wasn't rich, but they had what mattered: dignity. His father worked 16 hours a day at the factory. Her mother sewed to supplement her income, and William, his younger brother, was his shadow, his admirer, his best friend. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, Jack didn't think twice. He enlisted the next day. "It's my duty," he told his crying mother. "It's my responsibility to protect you, to protect our way of life." William, just 17 at the time, wanted to go too. "Next year, when you turn 18, Jack promised, "protect the family until I return." The farewell at the train station still haunts Jack's dreams. His father's tight hug, his mother's silent tears, and William's words, "I'll make you proud, Jack, I promise." The training was brutal, but Jack stood out. Smart, disciplined, natural leader. He was soon sent to Europe as part of the American infantry, and it was there that the boy from Minnesota turned into a man, in warrior, in survivor. From the beaches of Normandy to the snowy fields of Belgium, Jack has seen the worst of humanity: destroyed cities, civilians massacred, comrades dismembered by artillery. The smell of death permeated his clothes, his skin, his soul. But Jack resisted. For 3 years, he resisted, not out of hatred for the enemy, but out of love for family. Each letter received was a breath of life. Each photo, a reminder of why he kept fighting when so many others gave up. The last letter he received from home was in December 1944. His mother talked about the harsh cold of that winter, father about the coal shortage. But there was no mention of William. It was the third letter in a row without news from his brother. "Must be busy with work," Jack said to himself. "Maybe with a girlfriend." But deep down, a fear was growing, a shadow, an intuition he tried to ignore. In April 1945, when Berlin fell, Jack felt not relief but exhaustion. Like many veterans, he didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate in the death of millions, in the destruction of a civilization, at the end of innocence. And it was like that, carrying visible and invisible scars, that Jack finally received his orders to return to the United States. War hero, awarded Silver Star for exceptional bravery, a different man from the boy who left 3 years ago. On the ship back, Jack dreamed of the cold beer at the local bar, with Marie's smile, with Mom's homemade food, with the stories he would exchange with William. Small pleasures that became enormous treasures for a man who saw hell on earth. Little did he know that the real battle awaited at home, a battle no military training could have prepared him for. June 23, 1945. The Minnesota sun has never looked so bright, the sky so blue, the air so pure. Jack disembarked the train wearing his impeccable uniform, medals glittering on his chest. Hero returning to his land. The station was decorated with American flags, welcome banners, children waving small flags, a band playing "When Johnny Comes Marching Home," a welcome to make any soldier feel valued, recognized. But as he walked along the platform, Jack noticed something strange. The smiles were tense, the glances fleeting, the claps mechanical, as if everyone was playing a role, as if a secret hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Mayor Thompson gave a speech. He called Jack the pride of our community. He spoke about sacrifice, courage, patriotism, empty words that barely hid the discomfort in his voice. When he mentioned the Dawson family, he hesitated for a second. A second was all Jack needed to notice. Marie was there, beautiful as always, red hair shining in the sun, but his embrace was restrained. "Your kiss, brief. I'm so glad you're back," she said, her eyes avoiding his. "Your parents are waiting at home." On the way home, in a borrowed car driven by Reverend Clark, the silence was deafening. Jack tried to make conversation, ask about the city's news, about friends, about how everyone got through the years of rationing. Short answers, evasions. Reverend Clark lost his son on Iwo Jima, Jack thought, justifying the man's behavior. It must be hard for him to see another soldier coming back when his son isn't coming back. And then finally, the Dawson house. Small, simple, perfect. Mom's garden more flowery than ever, the newly painted porch, the American flag fluttering softly. The door opened before Jack even knocked. His mother, Margaret Dawson, looked as if she had aged 10 years. The hair, once brown, is now completely grey, the face marked by worry lines. But the eyes held something Jack couldn't decipher. Fear, shame, blame. Her hug was desperate, a hug from someone holding a life preserver in the middle of a storm. "My son," she repeated between sobs. "My son is back." Her father, James Dawson, was behind her, high, strong, pillar of the family. But something had changed. His shoulders, always straight with pride, now hunched. His handshake, firm as iron, now shaky. Jack entered the house. The familiar smell of apple pie, the photos on the wall, the grandfather clock that belonged to his grandfather, everything exactly as he remembered, and yet different, as if a shadow had settled there. It was then that he noticed there was a photograph missing from the wall. William's graduation photograph, the empty place, a hole in the family history. "Where's William?" Jack asked, trying to sound casual. "I thought he would be first in line to greet me." The silence that followed was like a cannon shot. Margaret returned to the kitchen, muttering something about dinner. James looked out the window as if the answer was out there, beyond the horizon. "Your brother isn't in town right now," said the father finally. He had to leave, for a while." "Leave? Where? Why?" Natural questions. Innocent. But the effect they had was devastating. "Jack," his father said, turning to face him with red eyes, "you just got here. You're tired, hungry. Let's have dinner first. Catch up. There's time to talk about William later." That night, at the dinner table, William's absence screamed louder than any conversation. His parents talked about everything but him, the climate in the city, Allied victory, plans for the future, as if they were surrounding a forbidden subject. And when Jack went up to his old room, as intact as the day he left, a terrible thought began to form in his mind. "William is dead," he concluded, "and they don't know how to tell me." With this dark certainty, Jack fell asleep on his first day home. A restless sleep, populated by nightmares where he searched for his brother on endless battlefields, only to find an unnamed tomb. The morning arrived relentlessly. Jack woke up to the familiar aroma of frying bacon and fresh coffee. For a moment, he forgot everything. I was at home, safe, in peace. Then, reality hit him like a punch in the gut. William's absence, the parents' strange behavior, the views of the city. In the kitchen, her mother moved as efficiently as ever, preparing a meal capable of feeding an entire regiment. "You're so thin," she said, spooning a third pancake onto her plate. "You need to regain your strength." Jack watched her closely. The nervous movements, the smile that didn't reach his eyes, the hands that shook slightly when pouring the coffee. Margaret Dawson was hiding something, and it was eating him up inside. "Mum," Jack began calmly, "I need to know about William." The cup froze in mid-air. A deep sigh. "Your father thinks we should wait a little longer before we talk about this." "What exactly are we talking about?" Jack's voice hardened. It was no longer the son asking. It was the soldier demanding information. Margaret sat down heavily, aged, defeated. "Your brother is alive, Jack. That's not it." Momentary relief, followed by a new wave of apprehension. "So what is it? Is he sick? In prison?" No. Margaret shook her head, her hands wringing out her worn apron. "It's more complicated." "How complicated, Mom?" Jack tried to control his impatience. "I spent 3 years in the worst conditions imaginable. I saw friends torn apart before my eyes. I think I can handle complicated." It was then that Margaret stood up abruptly and left the kitchen. Jack heard his footsteps coming up the stairs, the creaking of a drawer, and then she returned carrying a carved wooden box. "Your father is going to kill me for showing you this now." His hands shook as he opened the box. "But you deserve to know, you more than anyone." Inside the box, letters, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, others more recent, and all with a seal that Jack recognized immediately, a seal that made his blood run cold. "Are they William's?" he asked, already knowing the answer, already fearing her. Margaret nodded, silent tears running down her wrinkled cheeks. The first arrived in February 1944. Jack took the letter with trembling fingers, the rough paper, the faded blue paint, the brother's unmistakable handwriting, and as he read, the world around him began to fall apart. William wrote about being well, about having enough food, about companions who spoke strange languages, about demanding officers, about the hope that everything would end soon. It looked like a typical letter from a soldier, except for the return address, except for the fact that William wasn't supposed to be there. It couldn't be there. As? The question came out as a hoarse whisper. Margaret wiped her tears with her sleeve. He went to Boston to visit his uncle. Joseph, remember? In December 1943. Jack nodded. He remembered the letter mentioning this. He never got there. He was taken away. Taken? By who? Anger now replaced shock. By government men. Margaret spoke quietly, as if the walls could hear. They came with documents, talking about William's ancestry, about his dual citizenship that we didn't even know existed. Jack tried to process. Their mother came from Ireland, the father, a descendant of Germans who immigrated generations ago. What ancestry would that be that could? And then, like pieces of a macabre puzzle falling into place, Jack began to understand. The dates on the letters, the places mentioned, the fact that no one in town would look him in the eye. William has been recruited, he said, the words coming out like stones, but not for our army. Margaret hung her head, unable to confirm the terrible truth out loud. Jack continued reading the letters, every word like a knife. William wrote about boot camps, about being confused and scared at first, about gradually understanding that I had no choice, about being sent to the front, and then the letter that made Jack's world completely fall apart. Dated June 6, 1944, D-Day, the day Jack was there too, on the same bloody beach, on the other side of the line. He could have shot me, Jack muttered in disbelief. I could have shot him. Margaret was sobbing now, decades of fear and guilt finally boiling over. When we found out you were in Normandy too, your father almost went crazy with worry. Jack stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't any of your letters mention it? How could we? Margaret's voice was almost a scream now. How could we tell our eldest son that his brother was fighting for the other side? How could we risk you knowing this, while you were still there, having to kill or be killed? What if you hesitated at the wrong moment? What if... The rest of the sentence was swallowed by tears. But Jack understood. The impossible weight your parents have carried these past few years, the constant fear of receiving 2 condolence letters, one on each side of the conflict. Jack spent the next few days in a daze, wandering around the house, through the city, reliving every moment of the war with a new and terrifying perspective. Every enemy soldier he faced now had William's face blurred out. Each shot fired could have changed the course of his entire existence. William's letters told a story of confusion, fear, and eventually resignation. Like many young people drawn into war, he ended up fighting not for ideology, but for survival, out of loyalty to immediate companions. He was forced to wear a uniform he didn't choose and defend a cause he didn't fully understand. The last letter was dated February 1945. William was writing about rumors that the war was nearing its end, about his fear of what would happen next, about how he would be seen in his homeland, if he would be called a traitor when he never had a choice. In the basement of the house, Jack found a box with William's belongings. School books, the baseball uniform, photographs, a life interrupted by war. At the bottom of the box, a diary. The diary William had kept since he was 14. The last few entries before he left for Boston talked about how he admired Jack, how he wanted to be like his older brother, brave, decided, patriot, and how he planned to enlist as soon as he turned 18, to follow in the footsteps of the man I most admired in the world. The irony was too brutal, too cruel. Jack couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. He spent entire nights studying maps of the war, trying to track down where William might have been, if there was any possibility that they had been on the same battlefields, face to face. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Jack finally opened the bottle of whiskey he had brought as a gift to his father. Alone in the room, with only the dim light of a lamp, he drank, until he felt numb, until the cards in front of him became blurry, until the pain subsided even if for a few hours. That's when he noticed something curious in one of William's letters. A stain, a different brand of paint, something that seemed to have been written and then erased. Intrigued, Jack held the letter closer to the light. He tilted it at different angles, and then he saw it, ghost words emerging from the paper, a hidden message, St. Lo, July 11th, .42, American soldier. Spared. St. Lo. Jack knew that place well, the bloody battle in Normandy, one of the fiercest of the entire campaign, and he was there, on July 11th, at the point designated as 42 on American military maps. It was as if lightning struck him. The memory came back with crystal clarity, an enemy soldier suddenly appearing in the morning mist, young, scared, a moment of hesitation on both sides, eyes that seemed to recognize each other, and then artillery blasts separating them before any shots were fired. Jack always considered that moment to be lucky, like one of the many almosts every soldier experiences in combat. Never imagined, never could imagine. With shaking hands, Jack searched through his military backpack, not yet completely unpacked. At the bottom, wrapped in a silk scarf, is a small notebook, his war diary, unofficial. Guys, the place where he recorded not strategies or movements, but feelings, fears, hopes, the human moments that the war tried to take from him. From the July 11th entry, "Today I saw something in the enemy's eyes that I will not forget. It wasn't hate, it was recognition. As if for an instant, we both remembered that we are just men, thrown into this hell by forces beyond our control." The tears came without warning, intense, liberators. Jack cried for his lost brother, for the impossible moment they shared without knowing it, for the cruelty of a world that placed two brothers on opposite sides of a war that was never theirs. When the sun rose, he found Jack still sitting in the living room, exhausted, empty, but with a new determination rising in his chest. "I'll find him," he swore out loud. "No matter where I am, no matter what happened, I'm going to bring my brother back." His father found him like this, determined, transformed, and I knew immediately that Jack had discovered everything. "We've been trying to locate him since the end of the war," James confessed, sitting heavily next to his son. "We know he was captured, that he's in some Allied prison camp, but the bureaucracy, the confusing records, the shame." "Shame?" Jack interrupted, his voice hard. "What shame can there be in being a victim of circumstances, in being forced to fight a war you never chose?" James looked at his son with new eyes, seeing no longer the boy who left but the man who returned, a man who has seen hell and returned with an understanding that few achieve, about how war has no real heroes or villains, just victims. "Help me." "Find him, Dad?" Jack asked, his voice now soft. "Help me bring William home." James nodded, silent tears streaming down his hard face. "There's something you need to see first," he said, standing up with an effort. "Something that arrived yesterday while you were away." From the inside pocket of his coat, James withdrew a crumpled envelope, official, with American military stamps, the kind of envelope that usually carried the worst news. "Open it," he said simply, handing it to Jack. With his heart thundering, Jack opened the envelope, read the official document once, twice, trying to understand the implications, the possibilities. It was a notification from the War Department about a prisoner captured on German territory, a young man identified as William James Dawson, American citizen, initially classified as an enemy combatant, reclassified after investigation as an American civilian under duress. Between the lines of bureaucratic language, a story of redemption, of recognition, of a country slowly accepting the complexity of the times in which they lived, and at the end, the words that made Jack's heart stop: "Prisoner will be transferred to facilities on U.S. soil for final processing and possible repatriation." Not only was William alive, he was returning home. What would you do in Jack's place? Tell us in the comments. Mist covered the battlefield like a ghostly cloak. It was July 1944, and St. Lo had turned into hell on earth. Building debris, bomb craters, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder and death. Jack could feel the moisture seeping into his uniform as he moved cautiously across the rough terrain. His unit had become separated during the morning bombardment. He was alone, vulnerable. The crack of a broken branch made Jack spin quickly, gun drawn, adrenaline pumping through your veins, senses sharpened by months of uninterrupted combat. And then, like a ghost emerging from the fog, a silhouette, an enemy soldier, as young as he is, as scared as he is. For an eternal moment they were both paralyzed, eyes fixed on each other, guns pointed, fingers on the triggers. The difference between life and death reduced to one movement. At a moment of decision, there was something in those eyes, something that Jack couldn't name at the time but that has haunted him ever since. It wasn't hate, it wasn't fear. Was it recognition? as if, through the artificial divisions of war, two human beings could, for a moment, see beyond the uniforms, the flags, the ideologies. No shots were fired. A distant explosion made the ground shake. When the dust settled, the soldier was gone. Jack continued his mission, archiving that encounter as one of the thousands of inexplicable moments of the war. A coincidence, a fluke, an almost that meant the difference between returning home or becoming another cross in a distant cemetery. Now, sitting in his Minnesota living room, William's letters spread out in front of him, Jack relived that moment with a terrible new clarity. The coded message left no doubt. St. Louis, July 11th, .42, American soldier spared. William was there, that day, in that exact place, and something, instinct, fate, or the invisible bond that binds brothers, prevented an unimaginable tragedy from happening. Jack's hands shook as he picked up William's photographs again, the young face, the carefree smile from before the war. I tried to superimpose that image on the hazy memory of the soldier in the fog. Could it be him? The same eyes? The same face shape? Time and trauma had blurred the memory, making it impossible to be completely sure. But in his heart, Jack knew. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic or evidence. In that brief encounter, something beyond reason had spoken louder. Blood recognizing blood even when the mind couldn't. Military documents that Jack obtained through his contacts in the army confirmed William's unit had been in the St. Louis region during that fateful week in July. The coordinates matched. The dates coincided. The impossible mathematics of a global war, where millions of men moved like pieces in a macabre game, had brought two brothers face to face. "Do you remember?" Jack asked his father, showing him the documents, the maps, the evidence he had meticulously gathered. James Dawson studied the papers with tired eyes, eyes that had cried too much in recent years. William mentioned something, in a letter that arrived in August, about seeing an American soldier, about not being able to, not wanting to. The father's voice trailed off. The implications were too heavy to put into words. What would have happened if William had pulled the trigger? If Jack had shot first? How could a family survive such a tragedy? At the small desk in his childhood bedroom, Jack wrote frantically, one letter after another, for congressmen, to the War Department, for anyone who could help locate William more accurately, bringing him home faster. He served under duress, Jack wrote. He was taken against his will. He is an American citizen. He deserves to return to his family, to his country. The responses were few, evasions, bureaucratic. The war had ended, but a new conflict was already on the horizon. Old alliances fell apart. New enemies emerged, and in the midst of this geopolitical turmoil, the fate of a young soldier seemed insignificant. But Jack wouldn't give up. I couldn't. Not after learning that he had been one step away from destroying his own family without ever knowing it. Not after understanding that chance or something deeper had prevented an impossible tragedy to overcome. During the nights when sleep didn't come, Jack would revisit the moment in the fog. I tried to remember every detail, every nuance, every expression on that face, partially hidden by dirt and exhaustion, and he wondered if William also relived that moment, if he had also been haunted by that fleeting encounter. One also felt, in some inexplicable way, that he had been in front of someone important. What would this reunion be like now, after everything they had experienced, after having been on opposite sides of a global conflict, after they pointed guns at each other without even knowing it? There are wounds that war causes that no doctor can heal, invisible scars that never completely disappear. Jack knew this better than anyone, but I also knew there was only one path to healing, bringing William home, reunite the family that the war had tried to destroy. And if anyone could understand what William had been through, the confusion, the fear, the impossible choices, it was Jack, because in the end, they had both been pawns in the same cruel game, different uniforms, but the same underlying humanity, the same desire to survive, to return home, to find those they loved again. War transforms men, but some bonds are too strong to break. Some bonds transcend even the most absolute chaos. The bond between siblings is one of them. And it was this bond that saved two lives on that foggy day in St. Louis. Does it make you think about the invisible forces that protect us? Share in the comments a moment in your life when you felt that something inexplicable saved you. Fall 1945. Golden leaves fell over Minnesota as a gentle reminder that even after the most utter destruction, life goes on. The world was slowly rebuilding itself. Nations redefined borders. Families searched for their missing people. And Jack Dawson awaited news that would change his life forever. The months after his discovery had been an emotional roller coaster. Moments of hope when an official letter arrived, promising progress in William's case, followed by despair when bureaucratic obstacles seemed insurmountable. The war had ended on the battlefields, but it continued in the corridors of power, in interrogation rooms, in prison camps, spread across devastated Europe. Jack had used every contact, every connection from his days in the army. He had written to his former commander, to the unit's chaplain, to comrades who now held positions of influence in Washington. His message was always the same. My brother is not an enemy. He is a victim, one of millions in this insane war. Gradually, small victories. William had been transferred from a prison camp in France to a facility on American soil. His status had been changed from enemy combatant to civilian under investigation. And finally, after weeks of interviews, background checks and psychological evaluations, the news the Dawson family had been waiting for, William had been released. I was returning home. The Minnesota train station had never seemed so small, so insignificant, compared to the magnitude of the moment that was about to happen. Jack, his parents, Marie, some close family friends, everyone waited in tense silence. The train whistle in the distance was like a call from another world, a world where miracles were still possible. And then, there he was, slimmer, older, the eyes carrying shadows that no 20-year-old should know, but still William, still the boy Jack had left behind 3 years ago, when the world still made sense. Time seemed to freeze when their eyes met. There were no accusations in those eyes, no resentment, just relief, recognition, and something deeper, something that only those who lived through the hell of war could understand. There were no words at first, just a hug, strong, desperate, as if both were trying to make up for years of separation in a single gesture, as if they could erase all the horror, all the pain, all the confusion, with the simple force of that human contact. I knew it was you, William finally whispered, his voice breaking. That day, in the fog, I knew it. Jack just nodded, unable to speak. The confirmation of his suspicions was both a relief and a new weight. So close. They had been so close to the ultimate tragedy. The days that followed were of readjustment, of reconnection, of trying to find a new normal in a world that would never be the same. William spoke little about his experiences, about the brutal training, about the officers who forced him to fight for a cause that wasn't his, about the horrors he witnessed and was forced to commit. But Jack understood. I understood silence. I respected him. There were difficult moments, nightmares that made William wake up screaming in the middle of the night, looks of suspicion from some city residents who couldn't see beyond the simplistic label of enemy, painful questions from overly curious children. Is it true that you fought against America? But there were also moments of deep connection, long conversations by the lake where the brothers could finally share their experiences, not as soldiers on opposite sides, but as survivors of the same catastrophe, as witnesses of the same human apocalypse. I never wanted to be there, William confessed one night, looking at the stars that shone impassively over the lake. I never believed any of it. I just wanted to survive, go home. I know, Jack replied simply, because he knew. Because in the end, that was the universal truth of all soldiers in all wars. The uniform didn't matter. The flag didn't matter. In the end, they were all just scared men wanting to go home. William's reintegration into American society was a slow process, bureaucratic, sometimes humiliating. There were forms to fill out, oaths to take, loyalties to prove. As if he could erase the years of coercion and fear with words on paper, Jack was by his side every step of the way. In the hearings, in interviews, in the endless sessions with government officials trying to determine whether William posed any national security risk. The bitter irony was not lost on any of the brothers. The same country that had failed to protect William from being taken was now questioning his loyalty. But gradually, the wounds began to heal. Not completely. Some would never heal, but enough to allow life to go on. William got a job at the local sawmill. He began dating Susan Campbell, a young teacher recently arrived in town who did not carry the prejudices and judgments of older residents. Small steps towards a normality that previously seemed impossible. For Jack, the healing process was different but equally profound. The initial anger against the system, against the war, against the forces that had put his brother at risk, gradually gave way to a more constructive determination. He became a vocal advocate for veterans, of all veterans regardless of which side they had fought on, because he now understood, better than most, how artificial the lines between us and them were, created by powerful men in distant rooms, with no connection to the young men who bled and died in the trenches. In 1947, Jack published an article in the local newspaper, an anonymous account of his meeting with William in St. Lo, a reflection on how war turns strangers into enemies, and how sometimes, even in the most absolute chaos, our common humanity can transcend artificial borders. The article was republished in larger newspapers, translated into other languages. It has become a symbol for conflict-torn families around the world, a reminder that even in the most extreme circumstances, there are forces more powerful than hate, than fear. That the division. War made enemies of us, Jack wrote in the final lines, but something stronger than war kept us from destroying ourselves. Call it fate, call it instinct, call it family love. In the end, it doesn't matter what it is called. What matters is that even when the whole world was conspiring to tear us apart, something inside us refused to let it. And perhaps that is the true lesson of the Dawson brothers' story, not about the cruelty of war, there are many such stories, but about how, even in the deepest darkness of the human experience, small glimmers of hope persist. How, even when we are forced to wear different uniforms, the humanity we share is stronger than any ideology, any flag, any conflict. Jack and William Dawson survived the war. They survived the impossible encounter that could have destroyed their family forever. And in their survival, in their reconciliation, there is a powerful message for us all, that in the end, what unites us is always stronger than what tries to divide us. Have you ever felt a connection with someone so strong that not even the worst circumstances could break it? Share your experience in the comments. 75 years have passed since the end of World War II. An entire generation was born, lived and died without directly knowing its horrors. For many today, war exists only in history books, in films, in cold marble memorials, a relic from a distant past that seems to no longer have relevance in our modern world. But ask Jack Dawson, now 102 years old, one of the last survivors of that era, and he'll tell you that war never really ends. May its waves continue to reverberate through time, through generations. That choices made in times of conflict shape the world long after the guns fall silent. William passed away in 2011, aged 86. A long and, in the end, happy life. 3 children, 7 grandchildren. A successful career as a history teacher. A choice that was no accident. He dedicated his life to teaching young people about the dangers of extreme nationalism, about how ideologies can be manipulated to turn ordinary people into instruments of destruction, about how easy it is to demonize the other when we don't see their humanity. His legacy lives on not only in his lectures, in his writings, but in the thousands of students who passed through his classrooms, who learned to question simplistic narratives of good and evil, who understood that the story is always more complex, more nuanced than the books usually show. Jack, in turn, never stopped telling his story, the story of 2 brothers, separated by forces beyond their control, placed on opposite sides of a global conflict, and how in the most unlikely moment, something deeper than military training, than propaganda, than fear, spoke louder, saved 2 lives. He preserved a family. He spoke in schools, at universities, at veterans' conferences. Its message is always the same. War artificially divides us. It labels us as enemies, but our shared humanity is stronger than any division created by men. The story of the Dawson brothers is more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful reminder for our current time, a time where political, cultural, and social divisions once again threaten to tear the fabric of society, where it is easy to demonize those who think differently, who live differently, who come from different places. What if, like Jack and William, we are pointing metaphorical guns at our own brothers without recognizing them? What if we are allowing labels, ideologies, and fears to blind us to our shared humanity? The fog of St. Lo has long since dissipated. The battlefields of Europe were once again farms, cities, parks. The physical scars of war have largely been erased by time and reconstruction, but the lessons remain, urgent, vitals, especially now. What I learned that day in the fog, says Jack in his latest memoir, is that our enemies are often created by circumstance, not nature, that behind every uniform, behind every flag, behind every simplistic label, there is a human being with fears, hopes, and dreams very much like our own. This is the truth that Jack and William carried for the rest of their lives, the truth they shared with anyone who would listen, the truth that perhaps is the antidote to a world once again on the brink of extreme division. When asked how he felt when he discovered he almost killed his own brother, Jack always responds with the same simple sentence: "I've learned that it's always easier to hate an abstract enemy than one with a face and name, and that when we give our enemies faces and names, we often discover that they aren't real enemies. It's a lesson that transcends that specific war, which applies to all conflicts, big and small, from the battlefield to the dinner table on family holidays, from the trenches to the digital bubbles we create, from geopolitical divisions to divisions within our own communities. Jack and William's story doesn't end with them. It continues through his descendants, through those who heard their stories and were touched by them. Through you now, knowing your extraordinary journey, what will you take away from this story? What lesson will you learn from these two brothers who almost became statistics in a forgotten conflict? Perhaps it is simply this, that even in the most extreme circumstances, our shared humanity can prevail. What invisible ties connect us, even when everything tries to separate us? That recognition, true, deep recognition of another as a complete human being, can be the antidote to hatred and division. In an increasingly polarized world, where it is easy to see those who disagree with us as abstract enemies, the story of the Dawson brothers offers a different perspective. A reminder that often our enemies are more like us than we'd like to admit, that behind the artificial divisions, there is a common humanity waiting to be recognized. Jack Dawson is still waiting for his letter. His story continues to inspire generations, and his final message, the same one he shared for decades, resonates today with renewed urgency. Never allow anyone to tell you who your enemy is. See for yourself, look into their eyes, seek their humanity, because in the end, the real enemy is not the person on the other side. It is hatred, fear, and ignorance that prevents us from recognizing them as a fellow human being. The story of the Dawson brothers reminds us that even in the deepest darkness, humanity's light never completely goes out. When millions died on battlefields, a moment of silent recognition saved 2 lives and preserved an entire family. This is not just a story from the Second World War, it is a reflection of what we face today. In a world divided by invisible walls, we desperately need that look of recognition, to see beyond the flags, the ideologies, the differences that seem to separate us. Jack and William's legacy transcends time. It teaches us that we are more similar than different, that there is a force more powerful than hate. The human connection that unites us as family, regardless of what uniform we wear. Every view of this video amplifies this essential message to more people who need to hear it now. Like the video and subscribe to the channel to strengthen this community that believes in the power of understanding. Your perspective is valuable. What did you learn from Jack and William? What did this story awaken in you? Share in the comments. Your words could be exactly what someone needs to read today to transform their worldview. An even more shocking revelation awaits you, a secret that was buried for decades and that completely changes everything you just watched. Click on the next video now and discover the truth that very few people know about this extraordinary story.